Hey there, gang. Thanks so much for tuning in. I just wanted to check in here before we get to the audio interview with Leslie Desmond. I had some sound challenges and also some video challenges during this interview, so unfortunately there's a bit of it that got lost as the video was giving me issues, and there's also some squealing that randomly happens throughout the interview. Unfortunately, on my end, I couldn't hear it, so I didn't know anything about it until after the interview was over. If that squealing is too much for your ears, it only lasts about a minute or two, I think, each time. So feel free to skip ahead in the audio whenever that happens. Some great content in this interview, and I'm looking forward to my next interview with Leslie Desmond, where we shouldn't have any of these challenges because since seeing this problem happen, I have upgraded my audio equipment. So in spite of the challenges with this interview, I hope that you find it enjoyable. And as always, feel free to contact me with recommendations or ideas. Thanks so much, gang. Enjoy my chat with Leslie Desmond.
Talking about horses, bringing you closer to some of the best horsemen in the world for tips, insights, and stories. Listen at home, at work, in the car, or in the saddle. This is Talking About Horses. Here's your host, Patrick King.
Oh, hey there, gang. Patrick King here, and I want to thank you for tuning in for episode number 26 of Talking About Horses. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by internationally recognized horsewoman, coach, presenter, and author, Miss Leslie Desmond. Leslie grew up in Massachusetts and Vermont. Early on, she trained horses and rode in regional jumping competitions and local gymkhana events, and then went on to coach children and new horse owners in the basics of riding and horse care. After high school, she worked at a number of show barns, racing stables, and small breeding establishments on the East Coast and Midwestern U.S. For many years, Leslie has helped horses and their owners. Among these were troubled horses that others had given up on, race horses, show ponies, draft horses, jumpers, and other kinds of performance and backyard pleasure horses. In 1990, Leslie relocated her riding school to Novato, California, where she founded Diamond Lou Productions and released her first 3-volume video series, American Horsemanship for Young and Old. During the last years of his life, the infamous Bill Dorrance asked Leslie to accept his guidance during a 4-year apprenticeship while she recorded his knowledge and experiences. Between 1995 and 1999, they trained horses together, put on demonstrations, and held clinics around Monterey County, California, while she co-wrote classic text, True Horsemanship Through Field. The sequel to their book, a 10-CD audiobook called Horse Handling and Riding Through Field that Leslie published in 2006, is an information-packed guide to better horsemanship through field. Leslie now works with owners and trainers who want to advance their horse handling and riding skills through field. She continues to hold horse training seminars and demonstrations throughout the U.S. and Europe. Leslie, thank you so much for joining us for this episode.
You're welcome. Wow, that was a long introduction. Thank you.
That's quite the bio. And as we were talking about before we got started here, I edited that a little bit from your website. So tell me the things that I edited, or maybe the things that have happened since then. Do you want to fill us in a little bit more on anything that I might have missed or should have?
You don't learn things quickly when you're working with horses. The real important things that you're going to use over the course of a lifetime get kind of washed up on the beach like sand. And the part that I don't put in writing on my website or anywhere else that might be helpful to people who are trying to get established is that you might need to have quite a few other jobs to get you through while you're learning enough to be able to charge a living wage. And the list of jobs I had to, before I went out to California while I was getting started and I'd really made my commitment was a pretty long list. I mean, I was lucky that I had a father. I won't go through the whole list of things that I did to keep the roof over the head, but.
Hey there, gang. So sorry about that lost connection, but we are back. Hopefully this connection is going to work better for everybody. Please feel free to chime in. Let me know if the audio is working properly, and please, again, be sure to invite your friends. So Leslie, we'll get back to that, talking about the systems of horsemanship that we're developing, Pat and John Lyons and the like.
Yeah, I just think in retrospect, because I was paying close attention as all of that came up from just from the bottom, from need and from the recognition of need and from a desire to reach out to people. I think there were a lot of I think they've certainly done more good than not, taken as a whole. I think literally, I mean, I'm going to say probably there must be 50% of the horse people in the world in the last 30 years or 20 years might not have dared to step up or step forward or throw their hat in the ring and their wallet down next to it if they hadn't had the confidence that there was a paint by numbers kind of a formula that you could follow and get to understand that a horse could do what you wanted without having to get kicked in the head and bucked off. I mean, that was kind of big news,
Right.
There was I think really in the end, I think, although it's probably led to the production and breeding of a whole lot more horses than there ought to be on the planet. As an aside, I think that probably has, it has probably put more horses on the ground than we need. It certainly has brought many, many more players to the field and brought a lot of people joy. And it's really been a boon to the industry, and the industry is huge. I mean, it's not just trucks and trailers and competitions and feed and veterinary supplies and all of that. There's another piece of this, which is human joy.
Yeah.
I mean, horses make people happy, and the thought of getting a horse or the thought of going out to see your horse. I mean, horses really, for many people, are a huge component of mental stability and mental health. And I'm not just talking about these poor old dilapidated things that are riding around, in less than optimum conditions, carrying people who are also in less than an optimum condition. I mean, that is a whole other topic that I think needs to be revisited right away by whoever wants to do it. That is another huge explosion of a recognition of need, I would say. I mean, another type of need, another type of use for horses, whether it's, returning soldiers who absolutely are in within their rights to find joy and find meaning and find, the ability to restore themselves. There's a wonderful cause there, as it is also with the children who are afflicted with just almost countless ailments and limitations. I don't have anything but support and praise for the cause. It's just that when you are actually staffing these underfinanced organizations with people that just are absolutely wholly unqualified to be around horses and to lead and to teach and to handle and to train and to be responsible for them, which I've seen more of that than not, it just makes me worried sick. Because in the end, the horses can only take so much. And you get a couple of good ones, and man, they work them right to death. And I really would love it if there were some sort of way that people could self-regulate or self-educate and just take some pressure off these horses that are in the wrong spot. I used to be one to, not every horse is good. Not every free horse is cut out to be a good therapeutic riding horse. And I know that people are finding this out every day. But I think that there could well be a way for some people, whoever they are, to step up. I know some people that are running some good programs, but there are many more that I hear about that just make me extremely concerned. And mainly for the children and for the volunteers and for the horses, for the whole group, because to match a horse and rider and to match a horse and handlers means that you understand how to read the people and read the horse. And I don't know just how many people really appreciate what a substantial job that is.
That's a tall task for sure. Yeah.
You know, to be able to read horses well takes a lifetime, I think. But
Yes.
tell me what you think.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right about that. And it's interesting. I just recently got back from Portugal. We were studying with the Valença family in Lisbon, and at their riding center, they also have a therapeutic riding program that's part of a program that was started in Texas that they call the Horse Boy program. And it's based on the idea that the riders get maybe a little more benefit, or a lot more benefit, I should say, from riding higher levels of collection with the horses, basically trading the kind of slow and flat movement for more energetic upward movement. They've been finding that the riders get more stimulation from that, and that it's very helpful to them. So it was interesting to see that and to get the chance to hear more about their program there and how that works. So there's a lot to it for sure. You know, there's a lot to it. And in the end, aren't they therapeutic for all of us, really?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think there's I can't answer for all. I can only say for myself that it's, I think I have to disagree with you. No, I'm not I don't feel so much nice therapy with horses right now. I'm actually quite frustrated with the state of things. Yes, I do, and I'll tell you why. I think the fact when you find your niche, and when you find a spot where you're useful, I think there is some therapeutic value in that as well as a paycheck. But I have just actually been reinventing myself, and I've realized that I've had to kind of stop being a coach because. So no, I don't have any therapy in this at all. For me, this has been a nightmare. How's that?
Well, that's an interesting take on that. But would you say that that's the industry itself and not the horse?
Well, I'd say that. Well, no. Let me finish on this line here. I can't say it's either one. It's somehow in the middle. I think I don't know what it means. The industry. I don't know what that word really means, because the industry is what? What is the industry? Is it the breeders? Is it what is it? Is it the competition drives it? Is it the fact that the value of a horse hangs in that delicate balance between the price of semen and the price of meat per pound to people who are going to eat it, whether it's got drugs in it or not? I mean, what is the industry anymore? I think it needs a new definition, because I just don't, I can't, I see on one spectrum, there are people that are just going, 100 miles an hour in a new direction, trying to develop all these new boutique breeds and not lose this strain and keep that old ancient horse that came off some Spanish galleon, keep his bloodlines going. And I don't think there's a thing wrong with that, but the more I look at people who are advancing the academic end of the horse's value in history and trying to keep the nobility at the forefront, I mean, what's happening meanwhile in the backyards where everybody with a mare or a stud they don't feel like gelding and can't afford to geld is suddenly a breeder? That's also the industry. So somehow between the price of breeding, which could be anywhere from free to $1 million, and to the price of horse meat, is where that delicate balance of, do we keep him sound, or do we dumb down ourselves and the horses to accept this huge catch-all category called serviceably sound? I mean, what bothers me is that I have had to actually shift my focus and shift the way I spend my time and my back and my hands to really working on horses, because as many as 50 to 60 to 70% on a given week of horses show up lame for lessons. They're not fit to ride. And I'm not kidding. And this is no matter where I go, whether it's in New Hampshire or whether it's in Italy or whether it's in California. I went out to give a lesson in just out on the West Coast, not last week. And, you know, the horse's feet weren't right, the saddle didn't fit, and there was a whole lot of stuff going on that wasn't right. And so really that lesson turned into, for example, and I traveled quite a way to do that lesson, that lesson turned into how do you know when your horse doesn't feel well?
Mm.
That's what that lesson was. Not lead changes, not let's not eat grass on the trail, because, you know, I'm at a point where I'm not going to be part of a lesson that the horse is looking at me like that. I can't do it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Now that once you know certain things, it'd be like having your kid. If you were a parent, you had a child in varsity, you knew that their kneecap just went down the side of their leg, and you're going to run them anyway just because they have a chance to make a college, get a college tuition paid.
Right.
You're going to take that knee apart on a 16 or 17-year-old kid on the chance that they might get a sports scholarship. Maybe there are people that would encourage their children to do it, but that's a lifetime you're going to need that knee.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, I don't know. Do I feel that it's therapy for me to be with horses now? I guess now that I'm shifting and finding another way to make myself useful, perhaps. But actually, I'm still trying to hang on to enough of my own fitness, to be honest, where I can still get out and ride and have some fun. And that, as you know, to stay fit as a traveling horse trainer is a real challenge. I admire you because I happened to overhear you talking about your fitness regimen and your diet. And I think more people should be publicly proud of their, counting their push-ups and their sit-ups and saying no thank you to the, whatever it is, the encrusted, fragrant tray of hors d'oeuvres that
all those wonderful yummies they bring around,
yeah.
Right?
Right. All these trays of stuff, these trays of sinful stuff that just make you look like a 10-pound sausage in a 5-pound case.
So you've seen me in my workout outfits then? Is that what you're trying to say?
Well, actually, I meant that. You're funny. No, I meant that actually, sort of generically, not you, Patrick, but it doesn't take much to. I think once you really stop working out and stop putting fitness as your main priority, it doesn't take long for things to fall apart pretty quickly. I think there's quite a few people who would agree with me on that.
Oh, certainly.
But anyhow, I like to jump, and I'm determined to. If I can possibly do it, I would really like to get back in a state of fitness and find some horses that are sound enough to ride and sound enough to jump in a good conscience, and sort of pick up where I left off. I used to be pretty fearless and have really a lot of fun. I jumped for a number of years when I was younger and loved it, and it did well enough to sort of, I guess you'd say, get the addiction. And then there were other things involved with that, which I didn't own the horses. I just got paid $20 a ride is what I did.
Mm.
But you sure got on a lot of horses that were fast. So really, I mean, in the end, I guess if I were going to put a bio point in there, I would say, oh yes, and I forgot to mention that I used to have the best years of my life were riding point and shoot runaways over fences in the Midwest. They're all either going quite fast or not fast enough. But either way, if they can jump and you can pilot them over those fences, that's a real good time to be had.
Yeah, for sure. I like that, the point and shoot runaways. It kind of reminds me of a video clip. I'm pretty sure, it was a video clip that I saw of you years ago giving a demonstration or something, I believe, with a horse that was supposed to be a bolter. And in the video, there were several jumps set up around the arena, and I had to replay the video to make sure that I heard what you said right. And you said, well, you know, he's supposed to be a bolter, so we set up these jumps so I could have something to point him at in case he bolted.
Yeah, well, that sounds like something I'd say.
And I remember thinking, wow, this chick's got brass.
Well, I'll tell you, I'll just leave you with one kind of entertaining, well, it's sort of a fantasy now. It's just a memory, but I'm sure it'll bring a visual that wouldn't be too far from the truth. They used to have a class. It was a German class called Springen. I just think it means jump the bar. Anyway, it was, I think they started at about 4 feet. The fences would start at 4 feet and go up from there in 3 or 6 inch increments somehow. There was no ground line. There were no wings. It was just a straight bar, stride apart. And that was really a breaker.
I'll bet it was.
You just go through there like a bunny rabbit. And anyhow, I had 2 interesting experiences. Jumping, challenging, things like that. And I just got lucky with a couple of horses that I happened to be given to ride back in those years. And that was in high school, and after that kind of a little bit. And, 14 through 18, 13 through 18. So it was, they were just a lot of fun. And but I have been known to get through classes like that, and they'll raise the fences, and it gets a little tighter and it's a little harder. And sometimes on some of these other courses, they'll reduce the number of fences and tighten the course and turn on the clock, and things you just get a little bit sweaty and a little bit excited about the whole thing. And I've been known to win a class and then end out in the parking lot. You go from winning a blue ribbon to having it taken away. And the announcer says, the first prize goes to Leslie Desmond riding Tiger Rag. And then they say, oh, and she's out in the parking lot, folks. So first prize goes to number 68. And then, oh my God, that did give it away very quickly. You're out in the middle of the cars like that. So that's where I really...
Still jumping as you go.
Oh boy, easy come, easy go.
Yeah.
So, but anyhow, when you can enjoy riding, like you said, so that's kind of where the therapy came in for me, was riding like that. That for me was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And I look forward not to ending up in the parking lot, but just to, at this point, just getting to be a better rider again. It's funny how people, they kind of create your life for you. Some people think I have a huge ranch and cows and, trucks and mountains to look at and fresh streams they can come and put their husbands in to go trout fishing while I teach them riding all day. People are just wonderful the way they fantasize the life you have, and other people think you just ride all day long.
Right.
Just in the most amazing countryside, because you've chosen a life with horses. And actually the truth is quite different than that. But it does, I will say that having made a commitment to help people and horses, I've had to renew that commitment a couple of times, but I've never been sorry that I have. It usually coincided with, growth spurts of my own, or decisions that were based on things that were happening regionally, economically, things like that. But anyway, I feel so lucky. This is you say the industry, and I guess I think everybody has to define that industry for themselves. But my experience of what this industry is has been very, very good. It's been really good for me and good to me, I have to say.
Good. So speaking of growth spurts and changes and learning and improving, let's talk about when you met Bill Dorrance and when you started to learn more about this concept of feel. Can you take us back to how you met Bill?
Yeah, sure. Yes, I can do that. On the topic of feel, I think, to be honest with you, I think I had a whole lot more of it before I ever took a lesson from anybody. Because as a child, I was with horses day in, day out. I think I had I had the kind of feel that a kid has where you just get on a horse and go. I mean, at 11 years old, I was going to the auction and just taking back whatever was purchased to mess around with until I could get on them. I mean, it wasn't something that you would even think twice about. You just worked it out until it worked. I don't know how else to say it. So I think in that sense, I think before I ever started to think too hard about doing things in a correct or an incorrect way that included someone else's supervision and approval, I think I was much better. I think my horsemanship really got, my horse handling skills went down the drain when I started trying to train for a test or to please a teacher, which, started happening, in my teens. And after that, then I finally gave up all that and did things my own way for a long time after that. And I think I recovered some of the feel that I had. I think anyone who really truly has a passion and an appetite for horses is going to develop a feel. I see 6-year-old kids and 8-year-old kids that have more feel than people that have had 10 years of lessons. Yes. So I think I just think that word and the way that word is used and marketed and interpreted is important to give thought to. But let's just say that by the time I met Bill, my ability to read horses was not correct. I knew that I was in trouble. I was not reading horses well, and I was not appreciating them the way I used to, and I was in arguments with horses. I was not happy in my pursuit as a trainer or as a student or as a coach or as a horse owner. I was so frustrated I could hardly stand myself. But I also had a lot of company. About everybody I knew was in that same boat. At the time, I didn't know anybody who was, in those days, I was in California then, it seemed like everybody was complaining about their horses for some reason. And maybe it was popular then to do that. It had never occurred to me to do it, but I guess I did it. I guess I felt that way. I didn't do it too much publicly, but it was a private hell I was living in with these horses that I was trying to improve according to standards that I, at that time, held to be, a benchmark that I would need to achieve before I could feel good about myself as a horsewoman. And that was a really artificial kind of structure to try to succeed in. I was not going to succeed in that structure. And I think that if I hadn't met Bill, I don't think I'd have stayed in it, to be honest.
So it was based on the idea that you had, based on the goals or what you thought was right for those horses in the moment. It was based on that where the struggle came?
Well, that's a good question. I think that I had opened myself to an enormous new body of knowledge that I had been seeking and that I had read about, heard about, and felt and seen and recognized little shreds of it in other people's work. But in the end, the thing is, when you begin to learn and train in school on a regular basis with a group or with sort of there's a momentum that happens in a self-directed education. You're going to find people to ride with. You're going to find a trainer you like. You're going to go repeatedly to get more information from the same person or from the same type of class. And inevitably, unless you're pretty well squared away inside, you're going to fall prey to a human weakness. And human weakness, as it translated for me, was feeling inadequate. And I had been around that as a child because we didn't have money. I didn't have a trailer. I didn't have a fancy show horse or the right clothes. I borrowed clothes. I went to the used clothing store. I was paid to ride a horse. And then that started to make me feel a little better. because I ended up actually riding some horses for some pretty fancy kids who ended up sitting on the tailgate of their car watching me ride because they couldn't handle the horse. It didn't happen. Well, it didn't happen like that all the time, but it did sort of make me feel as though I had, a little leg up on something, even if I didn't have my parents there watching or some kind of checkbook behind my dreams. But the fact of the matter is, there are many people who do well with a checkbook behind their dreams and are happy and do learn to ride well. So it's not that there's anything wrong with getting into it in a well-financed way. It's that depending on how you operate your life, you're not going to operate your horse world any differently than you operate your life. And so what, at that point in my life, I was looking at was not just that the horse deal wasn't any fun, I wasn't any fun. My choices weren't fun. The people I was choosing to be around, I need to recycle them down to the last one. And, that's a hard thing to do when you're also counting on a community for a certain type of identity or a certain type of a feeling of belonging. I mean, it's not easy to cut the whole lot loose without casting yourself adrift. Sure. And you got to be strong, and you got to be pretty sure you know why you're doing it, because it can be a lonely trip out there with or without horses. But there's nothing worse. There's no kind of loneliness that's worse than being in the company of people that you don't respect and who don't respect you. And I'm not talking now about, that's certainly not the story of my life. I'm just saying that there is nothing that is more tough for people who are at an entry level in the horse world. It is a capricious, competitive, small, catty, barn life, gossip-laced world, no matter what discipline you're in. I've never seen it to be otherwise. And I came from a small town and a tiny family, and I was just not used to that kind of meanness. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think I do. We see it all over, and I think the way that you talked about it, kind of recycling the people that were in your life, I think that's an important part. And it's challenging when a rider is just learning and just getting started because they don't know. They don't have maybe the experience to deal with it. But I think it's similar in our life in horses as it is in our life outside of horses. It's important for us to be constantly auditing our personal circles, to see who's checking out and who's not.
That's exactly right. And now, what does that mean? Am I going to sound like I don't like people? No, that isn't really what I'm trying to say here at all. It's that if you're not squared away with yourself, you end up settling for people that rub you the wrong way.
Yes.
Instead of being selective.
Yes.
That's what I'm getting at. It's not that I, am going to take any credit for finding something wrong with everybody who was in my life at a certain period of time. That is not the point. There wasn't anything wrong with those people. They were all, I'm sure, noticing a lot of the same things that I was and finding, I didn't see that anybody was having a whole lot of fun. To be honest, I think there's a certain part and a certain kind of learning curve in the horse world where somehow the fact that you're learning is not something to be happy about. And I think I was around a lot of people that wanted to be like the teacher, and they couldn't be happy with themselves as students. They couldn't be happy with themselves realizing that they didn't know how actually to fix that type of stirrup. They didn't actually know what that part of the saddle was called. They couldn't say, now what's this called, this thing right here? I've been on all these horses, and what's this little piece of the horse called here? You weren't finding people, and I think it's still a problem, is that people don't dare. This is one of the things Bill talked about in his book when I met him. Right off the bat, he said, you didn't want to have people think you were in the dumb class.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's still today the truth. And I think that that was also something that I grew up writing letters and reaching out for information. I used to try to get rides up to Pownell, Vermont to go and talk to the guy who worked in the saddle shop there. I think his name was Joe Small, and I was only 9 years old. I used to try to get rides up from Williamstown from people who were going to the racetrack so that I could go in and talk to this guy by his wood stove while he was carving leather and ask him about my horse's leg, because I didn't really know how to fix a cut, you know? And I grew up quite open to asking questions, but I very quickly found out that the way questions are answered will either keep you open and searching and learning, or it will shut you off, shut you down, and make you ashamed.
Yes.
You see, and that kind of thing, unfortunately, and as I said, I'm sorry for all the people that I ever subjected to that same treatment I had for a while, because I did the same thing to some of my students. You know, I didn't embrace them well enough I wasn't gentle with my knowledge. And so, but that's, I mean, thank God that's some decades back now. I can't say this was last week, thank goodness. But you know, as we get older, we start looking at life and ourselves in a different way. And it's too bad you can't live to be 140, because you could sure be cool by then.
Yeah, right? You could have some things figured out by the time you hit 140.
I know, you really got some stuff working for you by then. But so back to meeting Bill. That took place in at a clinic that Ray Hunt was putting on, and his brother Tom was also there putting part of that clinic on with Ray at John and Winnie Lotta's place, and that was in September of '94, I think. And I think it was September of '94, and there were a whole lot of people there that I knew most of them. It was a big horsemanship class there, and some wonderful, wonderful hours spent there watching Tom and Ray work horses together. That was really, really quite an event to witness. I was very happy to have been there, and I took a lot of pictures and learned a lot there. But I came away from that at the end of that with an invitation from Bill to come down at some point after I guess I don't know that he gave me his phone number or how quite it worked, but I just remember that he said that we'd be in touch and that he'd like me to bring some horses down from Novato to his place in Salinas, the Mount Toro ranch he had there. And anyway, that was the beginning of it. And that was the beginning of something pretty amazing. When he took a look at my vehicle the first day I showed up, he said, well, I guess, he met me at the gate. He said, well, I guess we'll just unload your horse here and run her up the hill. And I was looking at this elderly man and thinking, just the way he spoke about it, run her up the hill. I mean, he was in I think it was just a little four-wheeler, and I jumped on the back, had my horse there with my lead rope, and you can't imagine the switchbacks and the steepness of this run him up the hill thing he was talking about. It was quite a ride up that mountain with him piloting this thing, and my mare just clickety-clack up the hill. It was quite an introduction to Bill Dorrance, I must say. But it was a wonderful experience, and he, after a couple of trips down there, and I brought my students, and we'd spend the weekend, and it was quite a few. It was a pretty hefty trip down there, so we'd come down on a Saturday morning and go home Sunday night. Probably did that, I don't know, half a dozen or 10 times before he finally convinced me in his wonderful way. He said a fella'd write a book if he only knew how. And I didn't know what that meant. I started calling around to try to find someone to tutor him. Can you believe it? I didn't know that was the way he was kind of dropping the hint that if he only knew how he'd do it. And I didn't understand. So you're getting him a tutor to teach him how to write a book? Yes. I went down to the community college there in Monterey County, and I made a couple calls to see if somebody could come up the hill and, teach him how to write an outline and take notes and all, but that is pretty far from what he had in mind. And I was so, I had a good chuckle over it, but really, I mean, in the end, I wasted a lot of time with that idea that I had to find him someone who would teach him how to ride. I guess things happen in the end the way they should, but I still have some very interesting audio files that I think at some point in the next year or so I'll try to get them out. Our first interviews were very, very interesting, where we ran a tape recorder, and it was. Do you want to hear how it was to start writing that book with him? Should I tell you?
Yes, I want to hear it.
Okay. Well, after I figured out, which took 2 months, that it was actually he'd like me to write his book, and I said, "Oh, okay." And it was actually, I think it was Joe Walter who I mentioned that to a couple of times. And he said, "Well, Leslie, that's probably the way he's seeing if you'd be interested in taking a shot at it. You know, maybe you'd want to take a few notes for him, or start with an article, or I don't know what. I don't know." We had a brief conversation about it. And really, it was just like a light bulb going off full blast. I couldn't imagine that I had missed it by that big a margin. But I was in for a surprise, because if you think I missed that by a margin, I missed a lot of things that Bill had on his mind. He was a man of few words. And when he did get talking, it was important to really pay attention and to remember. He really liked it if you remembered. Repeating himself was not his favorite thing. So I got trained up pretty quickly on how to work with Bill. He's a very, very generous man. But he wasn't real generous with his time as we were getting going on this book, because I was ready every morning. I was staying up at the ranch by then because I had a couple horses, and he was helping me train my two youngest. And that's another story in itself. But at the time, I was ready after breakfast every morning with a pad of paper and sometimes a tape recorder, and just ready to go. And so we'd get the dishes up and everything set, and I'd sit down with my pen, and I'd say, "Well, Bill, how should we start this? I'd be happy to take a few notes, and you can just start talking." And he'd say, "Yeah, well, why don't we have some lunch?" And I'd say, "Well, we just kind of finished breakfast a little while ago." Then he said, "Well, I guess I'll go down to the saddle room for a while, or to the rawhide room, not the saddle room, the rawhide room." So I said, "Okay, well, I'll come down with you, and maybe I'll bring this paper and pen and tape recorder, and we'll just see what happens." So we'd go down, and he'd tell me all about braiding and how important it was, and how he wished that I would start braiding, and this is how you prepare the leather. And so pretty quick, I had a lot of notes on all that. But I knew it really wasn't where we were headed. So after lunch, sometimes he'd kind of doze off after lunch, and I'd be there kind of around. And when he'd get to stirring, I'd go over and sit down with my pad of paper and try to get it going again. I'm going to shorten this up because I could take a week to tell you how long it took, and it took us 6 weeks. And anyway, we had many days of me having nothing on that page. And finally, he said, "Well, where a fellow never wrote a book before, it would be real helpful to have some questions." And I said, "Okay, well, this is after many days of this false starts, and let's go to have lunch, and let's clean up this, and what about doing like that, and let's go work with that horse." And I was happy to do all those things because, of course, I learned a lot with every moment I had there. Was very much fun and very beneficial to me on many levels, I have to say. But the book wasn't getting written, and I knew it, and life was slipping by, both of us. So I said, "Well, Bill, let's just say, what would somebody need to know to let's just say, to get a horse started? Where would we start?" Excuse me. And he said, "Well, yeah, well, I'll have to give that some thought." So that took the morning. So there was nothing on that paper. And then probably after an hour, it was I don't know whether I can't exactly remember that particular day. I just know there were dozens and dozens of days where I had nothing on that paper, and I'd try a different line of questioning, and sometimes I'd draw a diagram and want to talk about gates and this and that. And I finally started putting a little outline together myself, and he didn't. So never mind about that. So, okay, we're not going to do it my way. So I said, well, Bill, I think we just ought to get right to it. How do you train a horse? Put it right like that. And he said, oh, yeah, well, however that horse is how that fella has to be. And I said, okay. And I like that because that's the first time a sentence kind of rolled right out there, you know. However that horse is how that fella has to be. I said, okay, that's great. And I'm not kidding you. This is going on weeks of this. And I wasn't impatient. I was learning. He was helping me train my mare, and I was taking notes for myself about a lot of things. And he was correcting me left, right, and center on 1,000 things, including how I shut the door and the way I did all kinds of things, the way I cleared the table. I mean, he had a lot of observations that were. One day he told me I take too many steps. I said, what on earth do you mean? He said, you didn't need to walk over there like that, you know. And I said, walk over where like what? And he said, well, you just walked over there with your guitar. And then you walked back and you went and got that shirt. And then you went over there and you brought that magazine over there. And that's a lot of steps. You could have done the whole thing in one trip. So, you know, I didn't put that in my book, but I put that in my head. And it was getting to know Bill, you know. He was counting steps. And I thought if I'd only been a little sharper, I could have started asking him about the horse's feet right there.
Right.
But anyhow, so I was humbled. I was humbled all the time. And I had 2 dogs at the time that lived up there at the ranch that I had up there at the ranch also. I kept them kind of based around my truck and trailer so they didn't run all over. But one day he told me, he said, you know, a fella shouldn't have 1 dog. And I said, well, I don't. I have 2. And he looked at me and just with such a look as though that's the wrong answer. So then, okay, so it was the wrong answer. I still am not 100% sure what he meant, but he meant certainly I shouldn't have a dog, let alone 2. And I knew him well enough by then, and I said, well, what about that dog Jack you got right there that's running back and forth like a maniac on that line? You know, I don't know, with some sort of like border collie Kelpie cross. Somebody gave it to him, like 18-month-old thing, going crazy on this line, looking at the cows and everything. It was run back and forth on that exercise wire all day long. And I figured I could just, you know, if he didn't think I should have any dogs, maybe he shouldn't have one too. Because we were at least free enough with each other in our speech and in our candor for me to come back with that. And he said, oh, well, that isn't my dog. So, I don't know whose dog it was if it wasn't his, but that was a good answer.
He wasn't taking claim to it, huh?
No, not for a second. So anyway, back to this book writing project, which progressed very slowly, many weeks. But I'd say probably a total of maybe 14 weeks to get that first sentence.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, because we had two months. I didn't even know he wanted me to write the book, and it was about another 5.5, 6 weeks before I had that one line that was a sure thing. All my notes that I took, they went right in the wastebasket. Now, he didn't want any part of my idea about writing a book. It was just I was supposed to do it, but not that way. So,
oh, my goodness. My
process
goodness.
of elimination. So I said, all right, Bill, now it's time for us to kind of buckle down and get our book written, I think. Because, by the way, book writing doesn't pay real well. And so I working the whole time, too. I was going down off the mountain. And, you know, I mean, you just do a full day. You want to sit down and start writing a book in the middle of the night. It just doesn't happen.
Right.
So I had to really keep some pretty prime time available. And I said, well, here we are with our first line. And I'd review it about twice a week. I'd say, well, let's see what comes after this. If a fella wanted to train a horse, what would he do? Well, however that horse is how that fella has to be. So I repeat that for him to sort of, kind of warm it up and get him going a little bit, prime the pump on the next line. And I'd just look at him, and finally said, Bill, is there any more? He said, no, that's really about it. I said, really? I said, this has got to be the shortest book in the world. And he said, yeah, well, that's the problem. He said, I'm trying to figure out how to say more. And so anyway, so then I had to fall back on my high school, how do you write a term paper lessons from when I was a kid and used to write stuff from school, and I had to make an outline, and that's where we started. But what I actually did start doing, and what I direct people now when they get a copy of his book, which is out of print now, by the way, but there's still plenty of them out there on eBay and Amazon, and I got a few here that are, not many, but there's some. But anyhow, there are enough copies of that book out there to satisfy the need, I'm sure. But I recommend that people start with what I actually finally got him loosened up to go to talking, was to make what I would call a glossary, just to start to write down the definitions of the things. He had his own vocabulary, for heaven's sakes. Mm. I mean, he had a whole other way of looking at the world. This is a man who had an 8th grade education in what would he have been? He was born in 1906, and so in 8th grade he would have been 14? So 1920. So there you are. I mean, something around in there. 14 or 13 or 15 in the 8th grade, depending on how they ran that school. But the point is, here you got somebody who was in, basically the westward expansion. He was in the Northwest Territory just right smack in the middle of World War I, just after the turn of the century. This is a perspective that is hard to imagine. When he was training colts and growing up on the ranch with, his 3 brothers and his 4 sisters and untold numbers of cousins and people, it was a huge deal they had going there. There was 750 head of registered cattle. There were 50 teams, he told me, 150 saddle horses that they had in use or in training or cycling through to use on the ranch or with other ranchers or to hire out. This was not, you're putting up hay for that much livestock. There was not a second to lose in the daylight. So to be trying to, write and approach an academic subject with someone who had grown up that way and had a vocabulary and an old world vocabulary and certainly a very tailored home education, I would say. I think his parents were very clear on having, a nice way for the family to be, a nice way for the family to interact with the community. I mean, it was from what he told me and what I've gathered and the way I've seen, the way he operated and spoke about his own family. I mean, took a lot of pride in doing things properly. And that's why I wanted to reflect him in the best way I could by using his voice and not trying to put words in his mouth, Yeah. But anyway, that last section of the book, I should have made it first. I said at the end, I think we should really have a section, a glossary, Bill. He said, no, not while we're having that book about horses. And I said, yeah, but I think we need it. I said, people don't really know what you mean by what you say sometimes. And he said, well, what kind of words are you talking about that they don't know what I say? And, just to sort of rooting the nose, for example. we got a rooting the nose. And there are a lot of people wouldn't know what that meant.
Right.
Searching, there's another word of his. He'd say, well, or a sorry hand. He suppling a horse. He taking over. I said, well, I need to know what you mean by those things. People may or may not know what that means. He had another one that was interesting, working up the line. He had another one, within reason. That was the way he qualified a lot of things, or under par. So I began to write all these things down. And I said, Bill, we really need a section where we need a glossary here. And he said, nah, I think we ought to stay pretty far away from that. And I said, okay, then let's do it. Let's stay away from it. Doubling the horse was another one he used to talk about. Bringing up to life. I mean, just the people need to understand what he means by that.
Yeah.
Right? And collection, a cold-backed horse, cornering a horse, direct and support. And then he had that word feel. Let's see how many ways that he called feel in here, just a second. He'd say, oh, yeah, a fellow's got to ease off. What does that mean? Easing off means two things. It means a partial release, and it also means too much. I mean, you need a whole book just to understand what he meant.
Right.
So he had here in the end of the book, around page 318, he's got direct feel, following a feel for the horse, feel generally speaking, indirect feel, and then mellow feel, and feel of the horse, and then feel, timing, and balance. I mean, this goes on for 4 pages. And
that's a lot of feel.
Oh, listen, this was an amazing experience to be trying to sort out actually how his head worked. And I realized that once I sorted out his vocabulary and what he really meant by what he said, well, then we could start writing the book. But until then, that whole piece there, all those definitions and things and all that waiting around with no words on the paper, that was over a year, Patrick.
Wow.
That was well over a year before we had maybe 30 pages done. And so I don't know what more I can tell you. I hope I'm not boring your listeners to death with this.
Oh, I'm sure you're not. And so it was about a year to get the basics and about 30 pages there. How long did it take altogether for the book? Because it's for a year for 30 pages. That's a hell of a book. There's a lot to that. How long did it take from start to finish?
Well, it actually came out in June of '99, and I actually got the first. We started it in '95, but I got the first 30 pages done in '96. So it took another 3 years after that. Wow. But I must mention, he made me read it to him 11 times. I had to do 11 drafts before he was really satisfied.
Wow.
And I read it to him. That's how we did it. I read it to him, and then he'd make a change when he heard part that he wanted changed. Because what would invariably happen is that he'd sit down and read it and then fall asleep. And then I'd come in, and he'd said, yep, I'm just finishing up. And I said, oh, really? Finishing up what? Yeah, this editing here, this book here that we're working on, just finishing up. And I said, Bill, you're still on the same page you were on 2 hours ago. So that's when I realized he's not going to do any editing. He's not, that piece of paper and that pen he's got there, those highlighters and all that stuff I set him up with, it gets back to that original thing. He doesn't want to learn how to edit a book any more than he wanted to write it himself. So I did read it to him quite a number of times. I think a total of 11 times I read it to him, and then we shipped it off to get it printed.
Wow.
And that was a fun day and a big day.
I'll bet.
And when I handed it to him, that was a big moment, I must say.
Yeah.
I kind of woke him up. I came in the house and he was kind of snoozing at the kitchen table, and I said, Bill, I have a surprise for you. He said, do I know what it is? I said, you might. I I said, you might. And I just to fool around a little bit, I said, okay, close your eyes. And so I set it down there on the table in front of him. I don't know if he closed his eyes or not because I was standing off behind him a little bit. And he didn't say a word. He didn't say a word for an alarming number of minutes, I must say.
And your heart stops in that moment, right?
Well, I have to say, I was a little concerned. And I said, is everything okay, Bill? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, what, do you like it? Is it all right? And he kind of shoved it around like it was something he didn't want to eat, you know. He kind of pushed it a little bit across the table. He hadn't picked it up yet. He was still just looking at it. And he just kind of pushed it across the table with his knuckles. And I thought, what in the world? Why doesn't he pick it up? You know, of course, I was excited. I'd already looked through it, and I wanted him to love it, you know.
Right.
It did take quite a bit to put it out there. And he said, well, I didn't think it was supposed to be this big. And I said, well, Bill, for heaven's sakes, we just spent the last year taking out 1,400 photographs. He wanted 2,200 pictures in that thing.
Wow.
And I said, Bill, we just spent the last year editing out 2/3 of the photos and reducing the text by 1/3. He said, well, then the size of that book wouldn't need to be mentioned again, would it?
Oh my goodness.
So that was that. That was the first time that he saw that book, and those were his remarks, and I will remember them to the end of my days because he just had such a way, you know. He had such a way. But the important thing is that he reached many, many people. It wasn't, you know, I'm not the only person that made Bill's acquaintance. He helped a lot of people who came to him, men and women and cowboys and city people and neighbors and ranch hands. And, you know, he was a really vibrant and kind of an essential part of the community. He was highly respected, and he was there at most of the brandings that I knew about. I mean, he didn't ever miss one the 5 years I knew him. In fact, he'd get up, and his deal when there was a branding in the area, people would come and they'd all kind of maybe cowboys all over the floors and the couches and whatnot. And he'd be up, he'd get the pancakes going and get a little something going there just to usually leave. Some people had to eat before they left. He wasn't keen on that. He wanted just to walk through the living room there and kind of poke people with his cane and get them up. Let's go. We got to get to that when sun up. They're out there, and then they'd come back and have a big meal. And some of these people who were kind of new to it wanted coffee and a big breakfast and all beforehand. That was not his preference, but he was very accommodating, and he was very instrumental in getting, I think, lots of young men who had dreams about being cowboys who wouldn't have otherwise had the opportunity. I saw many people come and go through there that had other types of backgrounds and other types of opportunities, just kind of ended up there. And, you know, many of them went on to learn quite a bit about horses from him. So I can only say he was one of the most generous people and creative people I've run into. Made a huge impact on me. And I think that, you know, I just think he was here at the right time for the right reasons for many of us. And yeah, it was a tremendous, tremendous honor to be available then. You know.
I can only imagine. So you mentioned 3 brothers and 4 sisters. Is that right?
Yes, as a matter of fact.
That was, so Bill had 3 brothers. So there were 4 boys and 4 girls total then, yeah?
4 boys and 4 girls.
Okay,
yes.
So now most of us would know Bill Dorrance. Most of us would know the name Tom Dorrance. Who were the other 2?
He had a younger brother between himself and Tom named Fred, and he had an older brother, Jim. And Fred and he were pretty tight. They were real good friends, and as well as brothers. They used to stir it up together when they were trying to be cowboys. They were trying to be cowboys long before they could saddle a horse and get out there on their own. They had some stick horses they used to practice. He always admired Fred. Was a little bit, about a year and a half younger, but he was never at a loss for words. And particularly when he'd get in trouble, which was daily, Bill was always very admiring of the way Fred would just sort of stand up to the moment. And one time, that if I could just tell you this little thing that I just love, I've heard him tell this story a couple of times. It was really endearing. They were chasing these chickens around in the hen house, pretending they were at the corrals, because they weren't allowed to go. They were much too young to go. I guess they were, 3.5 and 5. So Bill had his horse all saddled up. Fred had his, and I guess they broke a leg on a rooster somehow. And one can only imagine. Anyway, I guess their father came in and just saw nothing but dust and chicken feathers and, 50 chickens just clucking and squawking and running like hell out of the way. And he said, "Well, what are you boys doing in here?" And Fred piped right up. He said, "We're parting out the chickens." And he said, "Well, what's going on to that rooster over there?" He said, "Well, he got in the way. He broke his leg." He said, "He got in the way. He broke his leg." Well, he said, I don't want you boys playing in here with these chickens. He said, "You go outside with your stick horses, and that'll be enough of that." He said, "If I catch you in here again, why, you boys are both going to get a spanking." So out he went, and they packed up their gear and their little ropes and their little stick horses, and out they went. 2 days later, when all the men rode out, well, you can be sure they were back in there. And they were stirring it up. And I think that there's a phrase called holding roe deer, and that's when you've got no fences and you've got a job to do. You've got your guys that are over there branding and castrating and dehorning and doing all their work a little off to the side, and you've got some people that are kind of holding the cattle as well as they can, the ones that haven't been worked on and that are just probably dying to make a break for it, but you've got some work to do to hold those cows until they're needed and until someone comes and parts one out and takes it off. Well, that's what they were doing with those chickens when he walked in 2 days later and said, "I thought you boys weren't supposed to be in here. Didn't I tell you I'd give you a spanking if I caught you in here again?" And to see Bill's face when he told about that story, he was just so admiring still, all these many years later. No, Fred just jumped right up there and he said, "Yeah, but we didn't know that you was here." And so, that kind of stuff. I didn't meet Fred. Fred unfortunately passed away as a young man in Southern California. He passed away in an accident, but he was really the light of Bill's life in many ways, and he was the reason that he went down to California from Oregon in the first place. And they worked together, and he shared a lot of his skills, and particularly the roping and the rawhide braiding, and quite a bit of knowledge about how to handle some of these tougher horses that were coming through to cowboys in those days. Many of them just flat wild. So he really credits Fred with a tremendous amount of detail in the formation of his cowboy character, really, because the way that he handled horses, the way he learned how to handle cattle on a rope was really something he was never shy about. Certainly there was some years and years of experience, but until he was 43, until 42, I guess, till Fred passed, that was his main source of information and inspiration, other than the horses and the cattle themselves. So there's a lot there that is really that he attributes right to his working relationship with Fred. who got down to California, earlier. Bill came down there in 31.
So Bill went down there after Fred?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, he did. Bill went down there after Fred. He came down in 1931, and then he met his wife-to-be, and that was a wonderful story that is, too long for the telling, and I don't know tremendous amounts about it, just that it was just a beautiful partnership and it was just a wonderful story. How they met, where they met, what they did. They built an amazing piece of Central California history right there, and raised a family together. And it's it's a wonderful story. But that's not part of this book. But it was certainly a big part of his life, and a big part of what gave him actually their partnership, and what they built together gave him the time at the end of his life to be able to write a book, actually. And so it's certainly something they did together, and he never spared an opportunity to credit Marie with, many of the experiences that happened at the ranch, and that the ranch even was at all. So he was, I think, it was just nice to hear him speak of her, So that's there's a lot more I could tell you about Fred and about.
It sounds like you've got a whole other book in there.
I think, there's certainly, I have actually cases of notes that are in storage, and many things that are still yet to be worked with. I just waiting for the right time in my own life to break that stuff out. I'm not quite there yet. I think I've got a few more horses to ride and a few more miles to go before I'm at the spot where I'll get into all that. It's pretty clear that it wants to get. It's clear that it wants to get told. I think it's clear that it wants to be shared. Particularly a lot about his. I just love the way he talks about leather and rawhide, and he wasn't really big on making saddles, although he had to do a fair amount of leather work in the course of his cowboy life. But the rawhide that was really his passion. But there's just no end to what you could talk about with people who knew Bill. I think there's still quite a few people left who did up in Nevada and California and through a lot of those ranches, and younger people. And, I say younger people, good Lord, I'm 64, but I'm talking about people that grew up around him when they were in their teens and 20s, who are probably my age now. There's a whole lot that can be shared if people wanted to. I don't know where they are or if they want to share it, but there are many people. I think I've met a few people and spoken to a few people on the phone that knew his brothers, all of his brothers actually, and his sisters too. And but they have unfortunately all passed by now. So it's just going to be a matter of who recalls what and who's willing to share.
Right.
What piece of it is left, out of their own experiences in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. I think the 30s, those people are probably not with us yet. But I was going to, I don't know, where are we on the time? I had something I wanted to tell you about, and I don't know if it's appropriate.
We're at about 9:30 right now. Time is good for me if it's good for you.
Okay, well.
We didn't discuss time limits before we started our interview here, so.
Good. Well, I think there's one horse training thing that I might like to bring up, since that's,
Yeah, we certainly have a couple horse training things we'd like to get to, but these stories are fascinating as well. I love it.
Well, why don't you? Well, thanks. I mean, it's so rare that I get a chance to really speak from the heart, and not with just people flying by through the course of their day, or because it really is nice to be able to talk about it and relive it a little bit in the speaking of it. Tell me what horse things we have done. You got a little list there? I've got one for you, but let me hear what
we do. We've got some things I was hoping we'd touch on. The idea of feel and release versus pressure and release. That's something I've heard you talk a little bit about, and I'd love if we could chat about that. We've got just some ideas scratched out here, some recommendations for folks trying to find a new trainer, recommendations for those trainers themselves when their customers maybe don't quite get this idea of feel or feeling of the horse. We've got the idea of groundwork, to talk a little bit about your thoughts of the groundwork.
Holy cow, this is a lot.
Yeah, we might be here till morning. And of course we don't, we can always do additional broadcasts. We might end up needing to make a series out of all this.
Some of these topics are a bit in depth. I mean, if we're not going to just skim around, I'd rather, if we're going to bother to talk about it, and not that it's a bother, it would be just nothing but a pleasure, but it would, maybe we should really take some of these things in depth a little bit later and see. Didn't you say that there might be some questions coming in from your listeners as well?
Yes, and we'd certainly like to open up the floor to questions from the listeners if anybody has any. We've been getting lots of comments about how much they're enjoying the stories, though, too. So.
Oh, good. Well, maybe I'm very happy to hear that. What we could do, what about if we take a few questions now, add it to that whopping list you just read to me, and then I'll see. Let's just take a few. Maybe you want to just open that up now, and we'll see what people have on their mind, and if I can combine an answer with some of the things that you just mentioned there.
That'll be good. That'll be good. So I just put out a notice then for everybody to plug in their questions that they might have for us. Okay. While we're waiting for them to come in with their answer, come in with their questions, do you think this would be an all right time to talk about that idea of feel and release versus pressure and release?
Yes, I do. And that's exactly, yes, I think it would be a great time. And I will tell you the way it came to me in one of the most important and effective ways that Bill explained to me about the horses' relationship to each other, and the way a mare and a foal, the way a mare teaches a foal to lead, to follow her.
Okay.
Okay, because obviously a mare will follow a foal. If anybody's been around those youngsters, I mean, a foal doesn't just automatically follow the mother.
Right.
They zing off there, like they go 100 miles an hour in the other direction sometimes, and they'll go as far and as fast as they can, as though before they really even have a downward transition in them. They'll go until they tumble down, or they'll go until they run into a horse that tells them to go back, or, it's a really interesting thing. I think the way that those foals start to work when they have enough room. There are two things really that they have to learn in life. One is how to stand up, right? That's the first thing. Where's the food supply? And then they need to learn how to recognize their mother and stick with her. And that is her first real job, is to teach that baby that she's the one, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they don't have halters and ropes for these mares. And it's not just like that baby gets hungry and turns around and knows that it's her. You've got 6 or 8 or 20 or 30 brood mares. Those foals haven't got a clue who's who until the mothers tell them. And I just found it so interesting the way Bill, who has watched probably countless mares raise countless numbers of foals, he said, oh yeah, well, that mare just feels of that foal. That's what he said. She'll just feel of that foal until he feels back to her. And I said, well, here I am trying to figure out what's feeling. He said, well, that's just how the mare and the foal get along. You can learn a lot from watching that. And I had seen plenty of foals, and I'd worked with plenty of young horses too, but I knew that I wasn't getting what he meant. And he said, well, he said, that foal starts to feel of that mare when that mare's helping him to get down the road a little. Well, that's the way Bill put it, get down the road a little. What are we talking about? It took ages for me to understand what he meant by what he said. Really, It took 2 years for me to understand without making a note in the margin to ask him what something meant. Get down the road a little. Well, that what it meant was she would drive that pole. She would teach that pole that her presence behind him was the security, that presence was the guide him. That pole would learn to look at her left and right. He'd learn to be driven on a straight line by keeping her right exactly in the center of his tail. If she wanted to teach that pole to lead, she first had to teach him to drive so that he was connected to her feel. The feel of that mother, of that protection, of that warmth, of that closeness, of that little voice, of that low nicker, of that little set of whiskers and that chin on the back of his butt. So really, you see what I'm talking about?
It's quite a bit.
Well, this is how he introduced feel to me.
Yeah.
Was to tell me about how a mare trains her foal to follow by following it. And his whole premise in this book is you get a feel of that horse, and then that horse will get a feel of you. When that horse understands your trademark, the signature feel of you, your breathing, your way of standing, your energy level, your tone of voice, your presence, when that horse can feel you, identify you as you, your intentions, your movements, the way you present your feel, and when that starts to work and get comfortable and familiar, and then you take that away, that horse will feel back to you. So what he meant was that horse will look for the connection. If you break that connection, once you've established that connection of you reaching to them means something to both of you. And the way he described it was that mare will follow that foal until that foal is ready to follow that mare. And that following could be at top speed, by the way. I mean, it's the mare's job not to let that foal go toward the wrong horse, not to go toward the wrong cliff, not to go toward the wrong anything.
Mm-hmm.
So, meanwhile, she's gassing around trying to keep up with him. He's understanding that wherever he goes, she's right there. Then there's a time she'll get in one eye and start to take her neck off at an oblique angle, right? And so that foal learns to have confidence in his eyesight. He learns to have confidence in, wait a minute, where is she? And he starts to learn how to slow down. So she'll teach him a downward transition with his shoulders up just by taking her head off to the side and teaching him how to look and follow her with his eye while they're running together. And as she starts to slow down and turn, that foal is already set up with his weight up and back and in the hips, open the leading shoulder, underneath his little nose, following his eye to follow her. Because the feel of her has gotten comfortable, has gotten to be how he identifies with being with her. So if we're going to talk about leading horses, riding horses, and we're not going to teach one to lead, it's going to be a pretty interesting ride. Right?
Yeah.
That's assuming you can get a saddle on one that you can't alter, lead, or tie.
Right.
And I'm sure there are people who do. But, just about anything you can think of, you can find out there. But you might be kind of a wreck.
Right.
But,
that goes into the don't try this at home category.
Yeah, or ever.
Right. So now that sounds similar to, and maybe it's the same, maybe it's very different. It sounds similar to what I've seen and heard with folks that talk about getting a horse to hook on.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I don't know. To be honest with you, I don't know what exactly is entailed in that. But yes, if a horse is going to recognize you and follow you and do what you want, I'm not sure what degree of feel is involved with that.
Gotcha.
I think hooking on can be, the hooking on, some of it that I've seen has been maybe a different kind of feel than what Bill was talking about. I think the hooking on that I've seen has been more of a desperate last resort in some cases. Not always by any means, but I think what Bill was talking about is the comfort of a shared moment, a shared intention, the way that you might, for example, you know that when you're...
Okay, gang, pardon the interruption. We are back again now for part 3 of talking about horses with Leslie Desmond. And just before we broke, Leslie was talking to us about the difference between feel and release versus pressure and release. And we were talking about the horse feeling of us and the difference there between feeling for you and what we talk about, what we hear some trainers talk about, hooking on or joining up or things like that. And as we talk about it, it sounds to me like the general idea is similar, or maybe the end goal maybe is a little similar, but we're talking about a different technique, so it's going to yield a different result. Just like you could have several different rounded objects and a frame, and one might build a bicycle, the other might build a car, and you could still get somewhere, but you'd be getting there in a totally different way. Does that sound about right, Leslie?
Yeah, I think I think when you're talking about, well, I was just trying to explain to you that I didn't know any more about feeling of a horse or feeling for the horse or the horse feeling of me. I didn't know any more about what those words meant than the man on the moon. I mean, that's why when he began to ask me to consider it and to think about it in terms of the way a colt that's just born has no halter, has no lead rope, but somehow that mare manages to get that colt when she snaps her fingers and that thing is on the double at her side and stays there. And we know this. I mean, we know that they have that capacity to, you certainly can't, it's like trying to catch a greased pig. I mean, anybody who is trying to halter a foal that doesn't want to be caught or haltered knows how difficult that is. And the mare is, for sure, an expert at knowing how difficult that is. She knows about it before any of we do, right?
Right.
Well, we do. So what Bill was trying to explain is that, you know, no more than a mare will go up and put her horse in a corner and force him to follow her. You just can't. It's like trying to push a rope.
Right.
So you have to work with something like that in another way. And part of what he got conveyed to me is that there are no mechanics in this. And this is the thing with joining up or hooking on that's probably a little different, is that that is technique. There are mechanics that go along with an approach that takes a system or that has a technique involved in it. The mare's technique is going to be exactly what Bill started his book with. However that foal is how that mare has to be. Right? I mean,
makes perfect sense, yeah.
Right? What's she going to do? Sit down and have an intellectual conversation and wait for the ranch hand to come out and halter the thing for her? Probably not. The horses would have long ago vanished from the earth if all of that was necessary. So
right.
What he's really saying is that in learning about feel himself as a young man, as a kid, on the ranch, and all through life, he would always get back to the way the horses are set up to feel of one another. And after you're done, that they feel of each other and they respond to each other for better or for worse. But nevertheless, this type of language has to do with the way it actually happens between these living creatures, that they can function as a herd. They get to understand a collective will. They also understand the individual wills. You'll never see more discord among horses than you will when there's not enough room to move and not enough food. You're going to see a lot of individual wills surfacing in moments like that. And, you know, and so it really makes the case for the type of animal husbandry, the type of horse care now that is becoming more accepted, more popular, more sought after, as options for private horse boarding are really becoming very limited in this country, and the cost of everything is going up exponentially.
Mm-hmm.
The more natural environment it can actually provide for a horse, the closer to the nature you can keep them, the more easily they will understand and read your intent for what it is and not misconstrue it, because they've had an artificial environment created for them in which to try to be themselves. Because when you're talking about horses that are actually not in a normal environment for a horse, a certain amount of pressure is already in their lives, which means that more pressure is going to be needed.
Yes, because they're basically so accustomed as to be desensitized to those other pressures that you're talking about.
Well, yes, and also that once you start to bring in one big piece of pressure, let's just say confinement,
okay.
let alone, let's just say they walked into confinement following a horse they trusted and had a good feel of. Let's say they walked in with two friends and suddenly they're in a confinement. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. That can be necessary, or it can be because they're bought or sold, or they're getting rounded up off the BLM. Who knows? But the point is, if you start to eliminate different natural, different things in a horse's world which keep him at peace with himself and at peace with the world, the effect that produces is a kind of resistance. It'll be they start to pace, or they start to get agitated, or they start to pick fights or get in fights with other horses if there's not enough room to move or not enough food when they need it and want it. All of these types of things. And it could just be not a bad thing, but just the way we start to observe horses that have been domesticated or put into less than natural environments. A lot of the so-called tuning up that people feel they need to do to a horse, or that they feel they want to offer a horse to consider to improve him, you can't improve on what a horse is. It's like you can't do better than what a horse came in as. You can certainly change him, you can influence him, but the more pressure that's brought to bear that he does not already know he does not understand the intent that goes with the pressure that he's being exposed to. He'll come up with his own idea of what it's for. He'll come up with his own set of definitions or responses to what he thinks he should do. And this is why, there is nothing bad innately about pressure and release. We're all under pressure. There's nothing good innately about feel and release. Poorly applied feel is a lot worse than well-applied pressure. I mean,
Sure.
I'm not here to make a case for, feel versus pressure. It's just that I learned so darn much about pressure and release that I got pretty darn far away from what a horse was by the time I got to Bill. I got pretty far away from who I had been as a young rider, who I had been at 5, at 7. I was getting along with horses right up until I was going into horse shows.
Yeah.
I got along with horses until I was trying to train for the test, until I was looking over, not aware of how my horse felt, and also not interested, I am ashamed to say, not even in my mind interested what that horse thought or felt, because what mattered to me was a nod or a smile from my trainer and my coach.
Right.
And I can't leave that fast enough. I won't take a trainer today. I won't take a coach today that has no interest in how my horse is feeling.
Right.
And that's, I'm not around people like that anymore. But if we're not going to put the horse's thoughts about himself and about his world, if we're not going to put the horse's relationship to his own potential and his own internal functioning at the top of our thinking before we put the bottom half of ourselves on the top of half of him, we might as well commit suicide an easier way. Because this is not funny. you just cannot ignore the fact that when you get on 1,000 pounds of I don't want it, unless you've got something wrong with you, or unless you, for some odd reason, feel that you're disposable, there is some permission that needs to be achieved. There has to be an exchange, an agreement of, may I get on you? Sure. Now, you can go to the rodeos and see what it looks like when there's no permission.
Right.
Those saddle bronc riders are pretty good, but even those, I really think those horses, those saddle broncs get pretty good at knowing what their job is too.
Yes.
I'm just exaggerating a little bit now,
Certainly.
but
Certainly.
truly, to be out there and try to make a name for yourself as a colt starter, most of those guys that I've run into now that are my age, I'm sorry to say, are pretty darn trashed.
Yeah.
They are pretty beat up.
Yes.
Back in the day, you had a little audience, you were climbing on for the girls or one more ride for, because your buddy bet you a cigar or whatever it is, or a steak dinner, you could get on and do that. But honestly, the body is something to preserve. We know that now, don't we? It's, I don't know too many people my age or even half my age that have been in horses that are not walking around wishing something had gone a little differently.
Right. It reminds me of an analogy my friend Richard Winters uses a lot of times. He says, I know old pilots, talking airline pilots. I know old pilots and I know bold pilots, but I don't know any old, bold pilots.
That's a really good one.
Yeah.
Yes. Right. Well, that says it right there. But let me get back to what you asked me. Was it the difference between feel and release and pressure and release, or?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, okay. I think a lot of it. There can be no possible way to consider that one is better than the other out of context. It has to always be in context that this is discussed, because to say, I'm going to ride my horse through feel and release, okay, that's fine. And how's that 80 kilos around his belly feeling to him today? There's plenty of pressure there on that cinch.
Right.
Right? How's that bit feeling up against those molars because you forgot to lengthen up you forgot to lengthen the cheek pieces on your bridle. Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There is so much pressure. People say, I remember Bill telling a girl, we had a little deal one time down in the Carmel Valley before we went out to Pebble Beach for his 2 clinics he wanted to do in 97. He said, well, I think we ought to go test out our theories before we write our book. I said, what do you mean? Before we finish our book. This was in 97, the end of February 97. He said, he said, we better test our theories out, because if they don't work, we're going to have to restart our book. I thought, oh my God, heaven forbid. Boy, I hope these theories work. So,
speaking of pressure in that moment, right?
Well, it's the first time I ever had a doubt that he knew what he was talking about. Just the way he put it, it really just the pit of my stomach. I'm telling you, I'm thinking, I just spent 2.5 years writing this, and he wants to make sure it works. Well, it's just the way he said it.
Right.
But
oh
the way
my!
he said it was just such a lovely, humble way of wanting to make sure that he wasn't putting out some kind of nonsense for the public to read. And then here's an aside, but speaking of feel and release, I'll tell you about some feel and release he gave me. He said, right at the end, he said, what do you figure we'll charge for our book? Because I was trying to raise some money to get the publishing covered at the end. It was an extraordinary, gigantic amount of money for me to try to think about pulling together. And I said, well, I'm going to start pre-selling these books, Bill. It's all I can do. He said, no, I don't think we ought to do that. And I said, well, how do you plan to publish it then? Well, that conversation ended with that. And we were very we were very friendly and very candid with each other, and sometimes quite blunt. And we understood how that worked. I don't think we ever. I don't ever remember not getting along well with him, and always being able to laugh through the tough spots, which we sometimes did. I'll tell you about those on another interview. There were a couple of very funny things that happened. But on this particular one, I said, well, Bill, I've already decided that the price point has to be $49. And he looked like I just knocked him right in the head with a spoon. And I said, what's wrong? He said, oh, no. He said, no, I think we don't want to stretch a fella's paycheck too far. And I said, well, okay. Well, what should we charge? He said, yeah, well, I was thinking about $2.50. And I said, oh, my God, I'm thinking, what planet are you on? $2.50 for the book. And, I had reams of typed paper, hundreds of photographs, $2.50. I said, well, Bill, can you just tell me a little more about the picture that goes along with this price in your mind? How's this going to work? He said, yeah, well, there's going to be my phone number in the back. I said, okay. And he said, then we're going to have a number on every line.
Oh, my.
I said, are we? He said, yep. We got, because, we're already working on the book now. I'm putting the words down, and he's doing the thinking about how this is going to go. Well, $2.50, his phone number's in the back, and we got a number on every single line. And I thought, wow, we really are not, we should have talked about this, before 1997. And it's okay. I was just listening and trying to appreciate his point of view, because he certainly reached far to appreciate mine on more than one occasion. So I'm thinking how this $2.50 book with all these numbers, I've got like hundreds of pages, Patrick, hundreds of pages of notes. Most of what I wrote never even made it into the book. It's still sitting there in boxes. So
Wow.
I'm thinking, how in the world are we going to do this for $2.50? So I just flat said no. And I said, but before I said no, I said, look, I've already started selling these at $49 a piece, and the money's in the bank. I said, we're beginning to get enough money together to look like I can at least afford to buy the paper. I said, I don't know. We still have to do the layout, size the pictures, pay for any number of other things that were involved, and it took a heck of a long time. So he said, well, when I get a call, he said, your fella can go down and just do it down there at the print shop. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you can do like they have a mimeograph. I'm thinking a mimeograph. That's a 1950s machine where you ran something off on a drum, right? This is what he's in his mind. I'm going to go down there and I'm going to turn this drum, right? And I'm going to be, because that's what other fellow is he talking about? He's going to get a call, and then the fellow's going to go down to the mimeograph, okay? So here I'm thinking, oh, Bill, this is amazing. No, this isn't what we're doing. So he said, well, you wouldn't want to stretch a fellow's paycheck too far. And he said, and besides, he said, it isn't really going to take that long. Just go down to town and run off a copy and put it in the post. And, here I'm realizing, within a month after that conversation, we'd already sold 1,750 books in advance.
Well, it's a good thing you weren't down there rolling the drum, huh?
Oh, listen, that'd be full time. I'd still be there. Still be there.
For $2.50 a piece.
Yeah. He said, yeah. He said, well, I figure about $2.50 ought to do her. Isn't that fun?
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. So, all right. So we're on this feel and release, and we're practicing all of this all the way through from start to finish. What I will say about the biggest breakthrough that I had in understanding where his philosophy and his practice departed from all that I'd been learning from Tom and Ray and Buck, and what that I was seeing all around me from all the other players, that national people who were starting to really develop some momentum on a, not national people, but different coaches and different trainers who had reached a level of national acclaim and popularity through the media and through some of these county fair systems you could get in on that, go down the road all summer long at these big events. Bill's biggest point of departure from all of that is that he believed it was important to ask the horse, not tell him.
Mm.
You start with asking. And if that horse doesn't respond the way you want, then it's up to you to decide whether you're going to make him do it and correct him if he doesn't, or you're going to set him up to succeed so there are no corrections to make.
Mm.
You follow?
Yeah.
So that, to me, was a turning point in my, as a human being, as a friend to others, as a trainer, as a woman, as a business person. That whole thing right there changed me fundamentally. And it's still changing me. It's still working on me in a good way. Because what he pointed out, he said, a lot of these other fellas, they won't take no for an answer from a horse. And I observed that to be correct. And he was the one who taught me the value of looking at myself from the horse's point of view. And he said, if you can't take no from a horse, he said, you're not really understanding his point of view. He said, you might need to make another presentation.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't, he said, surprising things might happen to you. He said, it's really amazing what they'll do for you. And it's also quite amazing what they'll do to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you're not willing to get along with them. And that part about what you do to get along means that you don't come in there with a pre-written script about what this horse is and has to be and has to do in order to pass your test to make you feel like you're a good horse trainer.
Right.
And that's the whole deal, which is that in the end, you have the choice walking in there, whether you're a student, a rider, a dude at a dude ranch, the best trainer that's out there, a top flight dressage or jumping or reining horse rider, cutter. You have the option at any moment to look at yourself from that horse's point of view and make a change, an adjustment, however little or big, that needs to be made that could make the difference between the horse staying in the game and you staying in the game or not. And that could be, avoiding an accident to just not, having one more argument that leads to one more other thing that leads to one more built up calcified layer of resistance that, in the end is going to backfire on some child or some, someone who knows a lot less than you do about making it happen and getting her done.
Right. It'll come out at some point.
Mm-hmm. So that fundamentally really was, I would say, I think maybe I gave short shrift to that, but I think if you were to sum it up, it would be, instead of the horse's point of view, set him up to succeed. And Bill didn't use the word ego, but many of the things that he said added up to that, so I will say it.
Mm-hmm.
I think what he was talking about is, if you've got a job to do and you need a partner, be a partner. And anybody who understands partnership understands that sometimes that job is 100% and you're getting back 0. And with a real partner, 50-50 is an ideal, but a lot of the time it swings back and forth from 100 in one direction to 100 in the other.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, that is what partners are for. It's so that when you can't, they can't.
Right.
And
right.
When she needs something that you can't do, she's either going to go, she needs something that you can do, or he needs something that a woman can do, whether you're talking about the marriage or interpersonal stuff or, however you set your social structures up, very few of us manage alone forever, happily.
Mm-hmm.
Many do, but that's often a retreat. And we see that in the horses that have given up on reaching out or participating. They're closed, their bodies are in trouble, their minds are in trouble. I mean, really, in the end, if you want the mind to be right, the horse's body has to be right.
Yeah.
And in order to get the body right, it means you can't use it as a punching bag. For the body to be right, you have to appreciate what you're doing to him from his point of view, which means not to help yourself, not to work him to excess, not to ignore the small things when he says, I'd love to, but I can't. Oh, yes, you will. By God, if you don't, don't do this, I'm going to do that. Well, in the end, a whole lot of horses, probably most, get trained that way. But what the practitioners of this are truly not aware of, my way or the highway, you don't do this, I'll make you like it. This type of little kind of this hard edge, that comes in with people sometimes. Usually it's for the astonishment of others, for an audience, either an anticipated audience at some event or performance, or because there's, lots of people hanging around that are admirers or employees or what have you. There's a lot of showmanship that goes on that's really at the horse's expense. You know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We see it all the time. This is not discipline specific. This is just people. But the point is, if you're not looking at the horse, at yourself from his point of view, where does the horse have a voice? Who's watching out for the horse? This horse that you will put your child's father on. This horse that you will put your child's mother on later, that you have been hard on all week, all month, all year. You're going to put yourself up there. You've got kids at home. Don't forget that.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I mean?
Right.
But really, is the investment in a moment of glory, or is it in the partnership? And coming from a ranch, Bill ran a one-man ranch. He couldn't afford to get a horse too pissed off, could he?
Right.
He had a big ranch, ran it himself, 3 young boys. You don't go out there and try to do battle. And where you don't have those big ranches like that run the way they used to run them, there certainly are people that are aspiring, I do believe, to incorporate more of that consideration for the animal and for others into their lives and into their way of being. Because in the end, when you do that, you also improve your relationship with yourself.
Sure.
I mean, you can't very well run around being nice to everybody else and also leave yourself out of it. If you're being honest, you're going to be you bring yourself to somebody, then you have to take the right care of yourself. So there's something nice to bring there.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, anyhow, maybe that's a good start on this. Did anybody write in with a question yet?
They have not. So I think everybody's chewing on those ideas. And I think that takes us back kind of to the part that you said was Bill's sort of opening line for that book, right? If we were to summarize what all of that means, it kind of sounds to me like, how did that go? Wherever the horse is right then, that's where that fella ought to be.
Right. However that horse is how that fella ought to be.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's pretty astute. Yeah, I wouldn't have thought to say that there, but you're right. I mean, in the end, if you're paying attention, the horse will tell you what it needs.
Yes. Right.
And if you're not, then we'll hope you have a burning desire to find out and a good coach not far away. Because without a burning desire for this, the depth, the refinement, the subtlety, learning how to read the horse, the small signs, learning about their feet, learning what they look and feel like when they're not breathing right, when they're one-sided, when their hips are off. These are small but important mechanical things that make the difference between them being able to do for you or not. Take care of you over fences or behind cattle or in the dressage court,
Mm-hmm.
You want to make sure that you're giving that horse every opportunity to do his best in a way that allows him to reach up to the job instead of have to suffer on his way through a schedule that has not got him in mind.
Right.
You know?
Right. Which goes to a line that you said, something you said early on in our conversation, and I wrote it down because I found it pretty impactful. The ambition shouldn't eclipse the moment.
Oh, did I say that?
You did. You did. I wrote it down in quotation marks, and I put your name beside it, so you must have said that.
No, okay. No, I mean, that is.
It was a good line. It was a really good line.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad it worked out for us tonight. But no, it is. I mean, and ambition is a wonderful thing. And
Yes.
There's nothing wrong with being ambitious. It's just a matter of it's how you manifest the results. And if you're leaving the moment out, just trying to hopscotch to some destination on a calendar or some destination in your fantastical mind, which features you worry-free astride some horse that has suddenly vaulted you into, the center stage of your dreams. I mean, I hate to inform you, it's going to be a much different ride than you think.
Right, exactly. Exactly. That is so true. Well, Leslie, we have quite a few things here that we can continue to touch on, but I want to be respectful of your time as well as that of our listeners. So we do have one question. Sarah did type in one question here for us that I think is great. And before we do our wrap-up questions, I'll pass this one out here for you. And it might be something that we end up talking about in the next broadcast. I'm going to let you be the judge of that. But Sarah's question is feel the same as turning loose?
Well, hang on a minute. I, first of all, need to know what that person means by turning loose, and I need to see whether Bill wrote anything about turning loose in here. And I also have to see what I mean about when you turn loose. I think that feel, I mean, you can read between page 318 and 320 in the back of Bill's book. There are 7 different definitions of what he calls feel. So it's not like feel is one thing. I think there are many ways to look at what feel is. There is the feel of a cold breeze versus a warm wind. And there's a feel that you would use. The same hands that can drive a fence post into the ground with 5 or 6 good slams on a sledgehammer, that's the same hand, that same fingers that can take an eyelash off an infant's face. Okay? Your feel is going to be adjustable in the moment to the job you have in front of you. Right? I mean, if you're going to take something out of a horse's eye or a foxtail out of your dog's ear, that's not the same way. That's not the same way that you're going to react if you get bitten by a junkyard dog on a short chain. Right?
Right.
So, I mean, turning loose, I'm wondering whether they're talking about if that horse feels back to you, and let's say you take a feel on the reins, and then he dips his chin, he tucks his pole in your direction, and drops his chin, and then you turn him loose. Is that what they mean by turning loose?
Well, I don't know.
Well, is that person still around?
Is Sarah, if you're listening, if that's the answer, or if there's more to that, if you could put that out there for us. So that's that idea, if that is what she's talking about, and she says yes, that is what she's talking about there. So
well, let me take it in that context then.
Okay,
I'm
perfect.
glad I managed to get the picture that she's talking about. So she's talking about you take a certain amount of feel on that rein and you get a straight rein and you're waiting for that horse to come back to you. You're waiting for that horse to figure out that you've kind of set your hands. You set a little wall there. Doesn't mean you're popping blood vessels off the top of your face and your knuckles are turning white and your feet are out on the dashboard. We're not talking about that kind of feel. But let's just say you want to pick up a soft feel on your horse. You gather your reins. There's a line between the bit and your hand. And whether it's just the weight of the reins itself or half a pound, doesn't matter. Whatever you decide or you and the horse are agreeing is going to work, you're going to hold and wait, and then that horse will come back to you and you'll turn him loose. You won't hold that. In other words, if he brings his head back and there's slack in your hand, you're not going to pull that slack back and then ask him for more. There certainly are people who do, but it backfires on many, many levels. Ultimately, it doesn't generally deliver what it promises. But there certainly would be some feel involved in the timing of releasing that rein back to the horse. But I think really, Sarah, the way that we're talking about feel, and the way Bill was intending us to understand it in its breadth and depth, really has to do with a combination of many things. Your physical touch. Let's say somebody walks in the room you haven't seen in a long time. You're 20 feet from them. You'd love to run over them and throw your arms around them and give them a big hug, but you still can feel indirectly that their warmth has reached you. All you have to do is see it in their eye or hear it in their voice. That's an indirect kind of feel. You give somebody a hug later on, that's a direct feel. Bill makes a big distinction in the way he talks about that, which is one of the ways and one of the reasons that Bill could think to mention that, is that he was moving cattle around 6,000 acres on his ranch up there in Monterey County.
Right.
So you're not up there kicking every cow in the butt to get down the road, you know.
Right.
They see you at, hundreds of yards or a quarter mile away, and they'll move right from there. I mean, there's enough wild in cattle to know when it's time to leave. If you've got the intention and you're moving into space behind them, you don't have to direct your horse's nose right at a group of cattle directly to move them. It'd be probably preferable, if you didn't want to scatter them, to try to be able to use a little more refinement in your and a little bit more knowledge of the animal in your approach to moving them. You think about 10 chickens on your porch. You want to get them off. Do you come in behind them, or do you whack everyone with a broom?
Right. That's a good analogy. I like that.
What a mess. You just get back to Fred and Bill in the hen house.
Right, exactly. That's exactly where my mind went right there.
Right.
Yeah.
Someone's going to get a spanking. And I think it's really quite good that they spent that time in that hen house, because Bill learned a lot about how to move cows on his ranch just by watching Fred walk those things over the head.
Oh, my goodness.
But that's it, Sarah. That's a good question. Yes, there is some feel and some judgment and timing involved, but I'll leave you with one thought, and then maybe we should wrap it up. The one thought would be, you can ponder the many, many techniques that are available and the many schools of thought that are available on how to train a performance horse. Performance for what? Dressage, or jumping, or reining, or gated performances. All of this is this is all in our heads. This is all what we do for our pleasure, for our satisfaction. And if you train a horse to take a left turn by giving him an outside leg, you want to train him to turn left by just bringing your right leg into his shoulder or his side, with a spur, without a spur. The fact is, whatever you decide is going to mean something will have to be the meaning that he ultimately assigns to it.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you're consistent, you could snap your fingers 3 times and whistle a tune and teach that horse to lope 2 circles if you put your mind to it.
Right.
There's no book that the horse wrote. Let's not forget that. These horses didn't write these books. It just depends on whether or not you're going to be presenting whatever arbitrary or specific mechanical detail that you want to apply to that horse's body or equipment, to his body or his mind through the equipment, or without the equipment. It's whatever you have in your mind, or whoever's mind that you can understand well enough to follow, that you think produces results that please you. That's how you pick a teacher, if we were talking about that before. If you like the way a horse goes for someone, that might be someone to emulate. You might want to just take a look at the way a person relates to a horse, and if that horse shows them respect, if you can see a discussion taking place between them that does not result in bad language, bad energy, violence, dirt flying around all over everybody, horses slamming their body parts into panels and round pens, and you just hear these bodies clanging around with their knees and fetlocks and heads hitting the bars. You have to think about whether or not the horse you're watching someone train, would you want that to be your horse?
Right.
Would you want that to be your animal right now? So I would just say, when you're picking a trainer or you're trying to figure out how to do a better job yourself, you want to start to think in terms of, is that horse going to come through this experience with the refinement and the openness and the clarity that I would want to have myself at the end of a 30 or 60 or 90-day training period? In other words, will I need to arm myself with a body vest and whip and spurs and a tight chain under the chin, or strap that horse down in order to continue the training after spending 60, 90, 120 days on someone else's investment in my safety?
Right.
Ultimately, that's what you need to be thinking about, particularly if you've got kids. I mean, there's probably the odd guy out there or the odd bird that nobody loves, but I don't think so. I mean, if you're dispensable and no one loves you, go ahead and knock yourself out. Be as mean as you want, climb up there and take all the risks you can. But I really think that if you love horses, I think probably someone loves you, even if it doesn't feel that way. Because, and so my caution really is about, it's more of a do unto others, If you don't want to be rushed in your learning process, give the horse a little time.
Right. I think it's a great way to think about it.
So anyway, I look forward to hearing other questions in the future if people have.
Definitely. Yeah. So gang, feel free to submit more questions. And Sarah gave a follow-up there that she said that the clarity helps so much. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Fantastic. Good. So before we call this an end, I've got some wrap-up questions. I kind of gave you a little heads-up warning about these. These are sort of the off-the-cuff, rapid-fire, the shorter the answer, the better on these questions. And if we do future broadcasts, I'm going to go back and check to see if your answers changed. And maybe the questions will change. So if there was one specific thing that you could recommend for riders to focus on as a primary means of improving their horsemanship, what would it be?
It would be twofold. And that would be make a conscious effort to stay out of the horse's immediate peripheral vision. If you want a flexible neck and available forehand, don't love on him like a dog and don't punish him for getting too close to you after you reward him for being there.
There you go.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's perfect. That's great.
Okay.
That's great.
Did you have another one,
That's
or was
great.
that?
Oh,
that
we've got a few more here. If you could ride with anyone, past or present, who would it be and why?
There are a couple. I would have ridden with Genghis Khan. Well, not that I would have wanted to participate in his carnage, but that guy, Genghis Khan and Attila the Hun, if you read about the kind of command they had over the numbers of people and horses that could do in formation without cell phones, without learning aids, without round pens, without walkie-talkies and videos and books.
Right.
I would have liked to know how someone with that type of command, obviously these were scary, horrible, mean people,
Right.
but how you can't just be scary and horrible and mean. You didn't have 10,000 horses that were all afraid who hung in. You get 10,000 horses scared, you're not having much of a cavalry.
Right,
Sorry.
exactly.
So I would have liked to learn how to do that at that point, like around 400 AD.
Yeah. What did they have that helped it all to work?
BC.
Yeah.
And all back in there, I'd say all pre 800 AD, I would have liked to see how those guys rode, and I would have liked to be in those training programs because they all rode bareback. They darn near didn't have anything to guide them with. They probably tied something around the bottom jaw. They hung onto the hair somehow. They used leg aids and line of sight. I would have liked to, that's kind of my style. Probably sounds kind of funky, but I don't care. That's the answer to the question. I would have liked to ride with those moronic bands of successful horsemen, as well as with any number of Indians on buffalo hunts who were riding 2- and 3- and 4-year-old horses with no saddles and coming through it alive time and time and time again, and knowing just how to place their horse in a herd of buffalo to bring home the dinner. I would have liked to do that too. That would have been awesome. Kind of right up my alley.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
Okay.
That's great.
And then on the more refined level, I probably would have liked to ride with Podolsky. That would have been a pleasure.
Yes. Fantastic. Okay, so what is your present personal definition of horsemanship?
Humanship, I guess. I guess my present definition of horsemanship is evolving still. I think I can't really rope that one in too hard. I'm still changing. I'm learning more things all the time from my students. I would say that for someone to call themselves a horseman or a horsewoman and not understand the functions of the feet and what a horse actually requires to stay sound in their body, I would say maybe hold off on a self-definition unless it included that. I think it's really, the time is now that to not understand how the horse's mouth works, how his breathing works, how the hyoid apparatus affects everything, how the hips and sacrum are really at the mercy of these overtly tight, over-constricted training regimens that horses go through. There's no reason to cripple a horse before his first ride.
Right.
So I would say I would expand and hope that anyone else who chose to align themselves with the definition of horseman or horsewoman would include as much knowledge as they could, which is now abundantly available, and certainly many versions of it are, so you'd have to observe a lot and remember and compare kind of thing to figure out what worked best for you, but to not understand the role of the hoof in a healthy horse, and the fact that horses are really not designed to eat and drink out of feeders with their heads high, to understand the importance of the occlusion of the teeth and the role that plays in being able to jump and slide, glide, and not have to just be relegated to breeding as a cripple by the age of 4 because, that's the industry standard. I would say that the people who really are going to get my attention will have risen well above that.
I think that stuff is so very important. I absolutely agree with you on that. What book are you currently reading, or was the last book you read? Uh-oh.
Okay, I'll tell you.
Uh-oh.
Damn it.
I'm almost afraid to hear the answer now. This is going to be funny. I hope everybody listening is really listening closely.
Well, this is... Okay. Look.
Uh-oh, there's justification coming before a title.
No, hang on. I'm just going to look at the year. No, I'm just taking a look a year. I'm reading a book called The Book of Good Meals, How to Prepare and Serve Them.
Hey, I like that. That's good. That's good.
And it was written in 1927.
Wow.
And then another book that I'm reading, which I can't read the title because the title page is gone, and so is half the cover. It was written in 1909, and it is a book about farm machinery and seed stock and how to make the best hay for beef cattle in the Northwest and the West states.
Wow.
So those are the two books I'm reading, How to Make Good Hay and How to Cook Good Food.
That's great. That's great. Oh, that's awesome. All right. How can folks find you?
Oh, dear. Well, I guess just my website would be one way.
Okay.
My clinics will be updated by the end of the weekend. I've got quite a few things that I'm a little bit tardy in delivering and in finishing. I've had quite a few things to take care of this last 2 weeks. But my website is a good one, lesliedesmond.com, and there is also a Facebook page. And I will also, I think I'll just give you my mailing address right here, because you never know when a sun flare will take this whole digital wonder world we're zooming around in, wad it up, and throw it to the floor.
This is true.
I don't really put much stock in, I mean, I do on a daily basis, but I think keeping a paper record of your contacts is a pretty smart idea. I'm not as vigilant about that as I should be. I like to put a card for every contact there is. I'm a big fan of the old-fashioned Rolodex, but given that it's just as easy to print out an address book, I just give you it. It's Post Office Box 234 in Lee, Lee, Massachusetts, 01238. So I'm a fan of a stamp and an envelope. So if people wanted to write an old-fashioned letter, that would be fine. If people wanted to order any of the equipment that I make, I just make two things. I make a long, nice rope, and I make a I make a bunch of ropes. It's on my homepage. But anyway, that you can do online. Clinics you can register for, or information you can get online, right on my website. And I suppose just my email would be ridewell, RIDEWELL, at lesliedesmond.com.
Perfect.
That'd probably do it.
Perfect. All right. And now something that we do at the end of each of our broadcasts, and I try, but sometimes I fail to do it at the end of all the videos that I make, is we ask a question of the day. And that's for the audience to answer. And we come back in and we check to see what answers people offer up. Whenever I have a guest on, the guest gets to ask the question of the day. So I'm going to turn it over to you. You get to ask our audience the question of the day.
Oh, I see. Okay. This is a new concept to me. Maybe I missed that in your letter to me. So I asked this.
It's always a surprise. You didn't miss it. I didn't include it.
you rascal. Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. I was asked twice in a week, and I really don't know why I was asked for some reason, but I guess I must have either seemed particularly brave or particularly vulnerable. But I was asked twice in a week what I was afraid of. Once in Italy and twice in Italy I was asked at dinner by two people, once a man and once a woman. Leslie, what are you afraid of? And no one has ever asked me that. And I guess I didn't know what the context was about life, or was I afraid to die, or afraid about horses, or getting kicked? It was a very untethered, kind of loose question. And I would ask, I think I will put some parameters on my question. I will like to ask your audience, with the horse that they have right now, or the horses that they are working right now, working with or observing, whatever capacity, if you're a farrier or a vet or a trainer or a student, however it goes, what is it that comes back to you over and over again that you would have to admit in the privacy of your own honesty in your own mind? What is it that is worrying you about a specific horse, or about all of them, or about yourself in relation to them? That's what I would ask.
I think that's a fantastic question. And I look very much forward to reading the answers that our listeners will put up for this. So, gang, if you want to give us an answer to the question, please just feel free to put that in the comments section below this video. Leslie, this has been so much fun.
Thank you, Patrick. It's been sure unique for me. I am so thrilled to have the opportunity
Good.
to talk about these things, and they really did mean a lot to me. I guess I have kind of an inner world that seems to entertain and occupy me in the privacy of my travels. I don't really interact with a whole lot of people a whole lot of the time. My spare time is usually spent trying to catch some rest or some decent food on the road. But this has been absolutely a pleasure for all the reasons that you just stated, and because it really feels so friendly.
Good. Well, thank you. I know I appreciate, as well as I'm sure everyone listening really appreciates, that you let us into that little world that you have there. I love it. I love it. And I know that you and I planned for at least one more broadcast that we have scheduled for May 10th. But, you know, with the questions that we have coming up and all the topics that we have ahead of us, we're probably going to end up with more than one more broadcast, if we're going to be honest about it.
Well, if it's as fun as this and as easy and pleasant and flowing as this is, count me in. I think you're great, and you're as I said to you the other night, I think you've got an absolutely astonishing capacity in this. Well, it's very visionary, really. What the diversity and the range of subjects and people who are really going to leave a lot for others is a wonderful thing. It's really an honor to be part of it. But mostly, I think you should be congratulated and very much admired and applauded for dreaming it up and then doing it. By the way.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. I do hope that in the years, the weeks, the months to come, that these broadcasts are helpful for folks. I know they've been insightful for me from a selfish perspective is kind of how I started this. I admitted that to you. The start of this was really just to give me the opportunity to chat and catch up with old friends that I don't get to see very often as I go down the road. And it's the idea of letting others kind of take part in these conversations was pretty appealing. And so it's amazing to me to see how it's grown and how it continues to evolve. So it's so wonderful to have you be a part of this with us.
Well, thanks a million. I look forward to it, and I hope that your regulars are not disappointed.
Oh, I'm sure not. Everybody seems to have really enjoyed this. So thank you so much. And Leslie, hang on just one moment, and I will be right back.
Okay.
Gang.
Thank you, everybody.
Oh,
thank you, Patrick.
Certainly. Thank you so much. Gang, I want to thank you so much for tuning into episode number 26 of Talking About Horses. I really appreciate you giving Leslie and I your ear. Please remember that if you've missed any of it, you can access the full broadcast through Facebook, YouTube, from iTunes, or by streaming directly from our website by accessing the Talking About Horses page from the Education drop-down menu. Through whatever platform you're listening, please be sure to give us a rating, a comment, a review, and a share with your friends. Your word of mouth and support is the fuel for this fire. Thanks, gang.
With your family.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Talking About Horses with Patrick King. If you enjoyed today's show, please leave a review and subscribe. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit pkhorsemanship.com. We'll catch you next time.